In 2003, between a pub and a supermarket, a royal burial site was uncovered in Prittlewell, Southend-on-Sea, England, during a routine commercial archaeological investigation. Roman and Anglo-Saxon burials had been discovered on this site back in 1923, and archaeologists wanted to see if there was anything else that might be at risk by a proposed road widening scheme. And boy, is it good that they checked, because this royal burial has been called the UK's King Tut tomb. For reference, no burial of this wealth and intactness had been excavated in the country since the Sutton-Hoo ship burial in 1939. The excavation site was a small plot of land just off to the side of the road. Job-wise, it almost looks like you have the perfect spot to work. You have an Aldi, a cheap grocery store a short walk away for breakfast and lunch, and then on the other side, you have a pub for post-work hangs with your colleagues. And that's pretty much all you need. A small plot of land and food on either end. Maybe it's not the most picturesque dream, but from a commercial archaeology standpoint, it's pretty solid. But the real treasure of working there came from the finds. From the first day of the excavation, archaeologists identified an unusually large square pit around 4 meters across on the east side of their first trench. The pit was outlined by a dark area of dirt, which usually means that there was a lot of organic material that has since decomposed. In this case, it looked like it was some sort of timber lining that surrounded the pit in the ground. Finding something like this on the first day of any site really is wild, because when you're looking at that outline, you immediately know that something's got to be in there. Then it gets even worse because you have to wait all night to go back and get started to see what's actually inside. And for me, that would have been the most agonizing thing, because I've been there when you just want to get into it and see what you can actually find, because you know that there's going to be some good stuff in there. And luckily, on the second day, the guess that the organic outline was a timber lining was confirmed when an ornate copper alloy hanging bowl was found in the northwest corner of the pit, still attached to an iron hook that it would have been suspended from. That means that this bowl was still in its original position from hanging on the wall of a wooden chamber. The archaeologists on site had just found a tomb. And a big one at that. By the end of the excavation, a burial chamber filled with rare metal vessels, weapons, a lyre, gold coins, gaming pieces, glass, and more had been exposed. And it was determined that this was the final resting place of a 6th or early 7th century Anglo-Saxon prince. And when I say prince, we mean prince in quotations. Princely burials, because we don't have any sort of denominations or names towards these. We're not quite sure if these were, let's say, just high-ranking officials or actual kings, princes, noblemen, etc. So with this sort of time period, across Europe, actually, there's quite a few, quote, princely burials, and it just means that they're, like, really rich, but we don't actually know who was buried in them. So that's what archaeologists mean when we say princely. You know, it was definitely something very royal, but we don't actually have any particular denomination. You know, he could have just been a really rich dude. And if you're wanting to know if the person inside this particular tomb at Prittlewell was a prince, you're gonna have to keep watching to find out. This find was so significant, not just for the wealth and intactness of the tomb, but for what it can tell us about Anglo-Saxon England. To date, this is the only burial of its kind to have been excavated using modern techniques and to more exacting standards, and it gives us an insight into the society and belief at the time when the first Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were coming to fruition and Christianity was spreading across England. It's said that the tomb of the Prittlewell Prince is the earliest dated example of an Anglo-Saxon princely burial because of 2 gold foil crosses that were found in the space where the coffin and human remains once were. Unfortunately, due to the nature of the soil, the only human remains found were fragments of tooth enamel. After the initial excavation, the finds from the burial at Prittlewell were extensively studied for 16 years. Over 40 archaeological experts worked on the finds, including specialists in Anglo-Saxon art, ancient musical instruments, engineering, conservation, and soil science, just to, name a few. This is one of those rare, amazing research moments where funding was taken seriously and the team was able to look at everything and reconstruct and understand every last crumb of that chamber. I'm talking extensive conservation, soil micromorphology, CT scans, mass spectrometry to get through all of the dirt and the corrosion, carbon-14 dating. If it was possible to do and worth doing to learn more about the find, it was done. And this is the part of the video where I ask, please people, give more funding to archaeologists for things, because we've now been able to learn so much about the Prittlewell Prince. Imagine what more we could learn at other underfunded sites around the world. It wasn't until 2019 that the full documentation was published, including a monograph, books, and a feature in the magazine British Archaeology, which is where I got the inspiration to make this video. If you've been following me over the years, you'll have noticed that I've moved a lot. Thankfully, that seems to be done for the most part, hopefully, but because of this, I've lost a lot of books and old magazines along the way because they weren't essential items to pack. But thanks to Readly, I've been able to access digital back editions of some of my favorite publications for entertainment, learning, and to get ideas for new videos, like this one. History and archaeology magazines are always a mixed bag of, geographic areas and timelines, and I love that because it encourages me to look outside the box and my comfort zone for video topics. There's over 8,000 magazines and newspaper titles available on Readly right at your fingertips, like British Archaeology, BBC's History Extra, and New Scientist. And I love that I can download them and read them offline on my phone during my commute underground. The app is super easy to use and really intuitive to your needs for reading, especially when you're on the go. I'm currently knee-deep in ancient history's lost cities and getting lots of ideas from that one. What's also super helpful with the app is that I'm able to bookmark articles and recipes to refer back to because I'm constantly flipping through books and physical magazines to find that one article that I need, and I of course have not put a sticky or anything, so this makes my life a lot easier. Download Readly today by scanning the QR code or clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment and get 2 months free. And if you feel like it's not for you, you can cancel anytime. The tomb at Prittlewell consisted of a timber structure that would have measured about 4 meters or 13 feet square and 1.5 meters or 5 feet deep. Inside the structure were 40 artifacts that were so rare and precious that Sophie Jackson, the Director of Research and Engagement at Museum of London Archaeology, called the discovery Britain's equivalent of King Tutankhamun's tomb. Of course, a claim like this sparked much controversy and debate, but it was made to convey the overall significance of the discovery and just how incredible it is that something like this burial survived. When you mention King Tut, you immediately are able to convey the excitement and quality of this sort of discovery. So I can understand why this comparison was made. It's a key cultural reference point. Even if perhaps it's not the most well-received, it still gets the people talking and gives the Prittlewell Prince the attention they deserve.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
No, it's not. It
gets the people going.
Not to mention that there was gold, a prince, and a completely intact burial with a previously unknown chamber. Sound familiar? So what exactly was in this tomb that made it so important to our understanding of early Anglo-Saxon England? And what made it worthy of this King Tut comparison? Actually, it was the locals who named the occupant of the Prittlewell grave as the Prince of Prittlewell and the King of Bling because of all the loot this person was buried with. To be honest, I think I prefer the King of Bling moniker to the comparison of King Tut, but maybe that's because it was a horrible history song about Charles II.
Oh, hail the King of Bling, let's sing.
First, let's talk about the burial itself, and by that I mean the coffin and what was found inside of it. The tomb's owner was buried in a wooden coffin with iron fittings and oriented east to west. The wood, of course, has mostly decayed, but it did leave a stain in the soil, and a small fragment was preserved against the base of a large copper alloy cauldron. The coffin was actually quite big and would have required multiple people specializing in different crafts to make it. It also would have weighed 160 kilos. The bigger the deal, the bigger the coffin, maybe? Textile remains on the iron clamps that secured the coffin lid suggest that it was covered in cloaks, and then there was an iron oil or beeswax lamp that was placed on top of it. The only human remains found were fragments of tooth enamel, and not much can be determined from these except that they were older than 6 years old because of the permanent molars. And for a 160 kilo coffin, you'd hope that something of that size was made for, an adult, or that poor child would just get lost in that kind of thing. But on the bright side, these pieces of enamel confirmed that someone was indeed buried in this lavish pit, and the fine location of the enamel shows that the body was oriented with its head to the west and its feet to the east. 2 small gold foil crosses were found next to each other where the head of the deceased would have been, which suggests that they were placed over the eyes, and it also confirms that the individual was Christian. This is one of those really interesting moments in history where there are these cultural and religious crossovers. The crosses are clearly Christian, but the other funeral customs that were followed, such as, the burial mound, the grave goods, and the wooden chamber, are all indicative of pre-Christian burial practices. That's what I love about finds like these. We're able to see transitions and shifts in culture, a blending of old and new. Yes! It's just so human, and it's something that we can see in our lives as we age as well, so it's something that we can really identify with. Further down the body were fragments of gold thread that, when x-rayed, showed an amazing woven braid pattern. These threads probably belonged to some very fancy and ornate cloth that would have been placed over the face and neck of the body. There were also 2 golden coins placed on the body, one around what would have been the chest area, and the other on the right thigh. These were probably held in each hand, meaning he probably had one hand across his chest and the other lying straight down. The coins were identified as Frankish tremises and date between 580 CE and 630 CE. Coins are always super helpful when dating an archaeological context, and alongside radiocarbon dates that archaeologists were able to get from organic material, it looks like this person was buried between 580 and 605 CE, which is a very early date for the adoption of Christianity in Britain. While it is possible that the burial could have taken place around the time St. Augustine came over from Rome to convert the Anglo-Saxons in 597 CE, Museum of London Archaeology has stated that it's 80% likely that the tomb predates this missionary trip. That means this find essentially shifts the entire timeline and adds so much more insight for when Christianity was spreading into the British Isles. The largest item found within the coffin was a gold belt buckle situated where the waist of the body would have been. Just look at it. It's so pristine, and it doesn't show any signs that it was used before it was buried. This means it was likely made custom for the burial and may have had some sort of symbolic significance. The buckle would have been part of a belt to go over a tunic and is 100% the biggest flag telling us that whoever was buried with it was important. Finally, to close out the finds in the coffin were 2 garter buckles that would have been used to keep stockings and shoes in place. From the placement and type of these finds, it's been estimated that the individual was a male adult or young man and would have measured about 5 feet 8 inches tall. And he was most definitely high status. If you thought the stuff inside the coffin was good, just wait till you get a look at what was in the rest of the tomb. Among the many finds was a wooden lyre with garnet fittings. The lyre has been called the most important stringed instrument in the ancient world, and you can see countless versions of this instrument popping up all over the ancient timeline, so I would definitely agree with this statement. This particular one that was found is the first time we found the complete form of an Anglo-Saxon version. What this means is that the wooden parts had decayed and completely disappeared, but they left a soil stain, much like the timber outline of the chamber, along with fragments of wood and metal fittings preserved in their original positions. With this soil stain, archaeologists are then able to see the full shape and size of the lyre and how the instrument would have been laid out. Experimental archaeologists can then, at some point, even create an accurate reproduction one day, and we can hear what it could have sounded like. Thanks to post-excavation in the conservation lab, archaeologists were able to determine that the lyre was made of maple and ash wood, and the garnets most likely came from the Indian subcontinent or Sri Lanka. Excuse me? How amazing is that? I love seeing that level of cross-cultural interaction and trading. What an adventure those garnets must have went on to get to Britain. What's really cool about the lyre is that at one point in its life, it had been broken in two and then put back together using iron, gilded copper alloy, and silver fittings. This item was treasured and loved. So much so that it was restored with even more precious metal. Think kintsugi from Japan. Another first of its kind find at Prittlewell was a 1400-year-old painted box. This is thought to be the only surviving example of early Anglo-Saxon painted woodwork. The fragment is thought to be part of a lid from a box, and the decoration includes a yellow ladder pattern border that is quite similar to borders found on Anglo-Saxon gold and garnet jewelry. It's finds like these that help us know that specific styles weren't just for one specific material. This border pattern was something that was a vital aspect of Anglo-Saxon artistic culture. Other items found in the tomb were gold coins, silver necks of wooden drinking vessels, glass beakers, a flagon believed to have come all the way from Syria, a folding iron stool thought to be a seat from which someone of high rank would give out rewards and judgment to his followers, not to mention a skillfully crafted sword with ribbed gold wire on the handle and an expertly crafted blade fit for a royal. There were also a bunch of other finds, but I think you get the idea as to how much was in this tomb and why it made headlines. It's clear by the contents of the tomb and their placement that this was all a carefully choreographed burial rite of someone with royal or noble lineage. Luxury items from so far away, like Byzantine spoons and Syrian flagons, in addition to locally made prestige items from around Britain, mean that this person and their family must have played quite a significant role in early Anglo-Saxon society, or at the very least, had friends in high places. So what can the Prittlewell princely tomb tell us about the Anglo-Saxons? Well, the vast majority of information that we have for early Anglo-Saxons comes from burials and funerary archaeology. These burials are actually quite varied as well. Some people were cremated and their remains were buried in ceramic containers in the ground, while others were laid to rest in coffins. In both cases, dress fittings and other grave goods were found, meaning that the individuals would have been clothed and buried with important or ritually significant items. From these grave goods, we're able to see that there were markers of status and identity, which give archaeologists a peek into the social structures of the day. For example, weapons were almost exclusively found in male burials, and jewelry in female ones. There's the suggestion that society was becoming more stratified. There was an elite social class that possessed a new level of power and material wealth. If we combine these material findings with historical sources, we can see that around this time, the first Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were being mentioned. So this elevated wealth of Prittlewell and the denomination of a prince or someone of great importance tracks. A princely burial like this suggests that there was a ruling family at the top of the hierarchical system in the Prittlewell area. There would have been some great estate with a hall for noble visitors and gift-giving, hosting, such as that, and some sort of surrounding farming regime with a productive agricultural population, plus a skilled craftspeople to support their lifestyle. On top of that, the Prittlewell Princely burial also gives us this amazing little snapshot of a time when Christianity was just beginning to enter the British Isles, and those in the upper echelons of society were incorporating practices into their traditions. On top of all this social information, the stains left in the soil from the wood that once lined the burial chamber and the wood material that was still preserved on some of the metal objects that once hung from these walls on hooks allowed Mola archaeologists to reconstruct how the chamber was built and even the woodworking technology that was used. So now we're getting an even deeper level of Anglo-Saxon craftsmanship and woodworking. It was even still possible to determine the direction of the wood grain on some of these traces. So we now know that the walls were made from radially cut planks of oak. It's insane how much you can get from just these teeny tiny things. Never underestimate the small stuff. I said it earlier, and I'm going to say it again. Look what archaeologists can do when they're given funding and time. It's astounding. Building a burial chamber like this would have been no easy task and would have required a lot of social organization. It's estimated that to make a chamber fit for a, quote, prince, it would have required up to 113 person days of work. At first, that sounds like a lot, but think about it. They need to dig the big pit, they gotta fell the trees and then make the timber, and then once that's all ready, you need to put it all together and make it look nice. If there was a decent team working on this, say 20 to 25 skilled laborers, they could have built it in around 5 days, which isn't that bad. But then it's been estimated that it would have taken another 18 person days just to build the mound over the chamber. So at best, this would have consumed a decent amount of people's work for well over a week. This is a huge investment, especially for farming communities, in labor and materials, meaning that this king of bling must have been someone important to the wider community, right? So, after all this work, is the Prittlewell Prince someone from history that we can identify? Can we put a name to this fantastic burial? Well, it's been suggested that the remains were those of Sabert, the Saxon king of Essex, who ruled from 604 CE to 616 CE. But carbon dating of the tomb indicated that it was constructed between 575 CE and 605 CE, 11 years before Sabert's death. If there is anyone who we might be able to attribute the tomb to, the best guess is that it could have belonged to Sabert's brother, Sexa. Of course, there's no way to know for sure, as there aren't any human remains, or, for that matter, big flashy, engraved wood or stone signs with names on them. This is super interesting to speculate because after the death of King Sabert, the East Saxons reverted from Christianity back to paganism. With the Prittlewell burial, we're seeing the tail end of a movement before it changed and went back to the old ways for a time. Regardless of who the Prittlewell Prince, the King of Bling, actually is, the find gives us an insight into the wealth and importance of the early East Saxon kingdom, which until this find has been frequently underestimated. Another princely burial for these East Saxons was found in Chelmsford in the 1890s, but because there weren't many finds and the excavation was not up to modern standards, it hasn't been given much attention. To add further insult to injury, the East Saxons don't appear much in Bede's History of the English Church and People from the 7th century CE because of this reversion back to paganism. So this makes it seem like the kingdom had little influence and gives us the impression that the East Saxons weren't as important or influential as other regional rulers. Thankfully, we now have the Prittlewell burial to challenge this assumption and bias, adding one more piece of the puzzle to creating a bigger picture of the social, political, and cultural changes in early Anglo-Saxon Britain and restoring the East Saxon kingdom into a place of prominence and power in the late 6th and 7th centuries CE. So the next time you're between a railway and a bit of road, or anywhere else you'd least expect something that might alter how we look at history, take a moment to remember that archaeology is everywhere. And it often catches us by surprise. Just leave the actual digging to the professionals, please. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you liked that video, you know what to do. Smash the like, smash the subscribe button, and as always, stay dirty, my friends.